welcome to the Sweater Soiree Knit Along. I'm Jana with Purl Together, and it's swatching day. Yay! Okay, so before you say, oh, I don't need to swatch, I'm not going to swatch, you do need to swatch, and I'm going to tell you why. If you've ever watched any of my other videos where we've done knit alongs, you know that I am a definite proponent of swatching. And here's why. You're going to spend a whole bunch of time and effort and hours knitting this sweater. You want it to fit. And if it doesn't, you're going to end up either frogging it, or you're going to have to find somebody that wants it, that fits, that it likes your colors and style of the pattern that you've chosen, etc. So this is the Sweater Soiree. So I'm knitting the Ripple sweater, and I will be doing tutorials for that, but you can be knitting whatever sweater you would like to participate. Still, you need to swatch. We are running a knit along over on Ravelry and on Instagram. So if you're swatching, there's hashtags that I'll put down below in the video description that I would appreciate that you use so I can follow along and do my random number giveaway drawings. So there'll be little giveaways. So more about that later. But swatching is key. This particular pattern, as I've mentioned in previous podcasts, is knitted in the round from the bottom up, and then it's knitted back and forth on the front and the back. You may very well have a different gauge when you're knitting in the round to when you're knitting back and forth. My gauge does vary slightly because when you're knitting back and forth, you're purling, which takes more yarn than just knitting in the round. So my gauge knitting in the round is about half a stitch different over the course of 10 centimeters. It's about half a stitch different, which isn't a lot, but it is that much different than knitting back and forth. So half a stitch over 10 centimeters doesn't seem like a lot, but if you're going round and round and round, that half a stitch becomes a full stitch over 8 inches, and that becomes 2 stitches over 16 inches, and so forth. And 2 stitches can end up being, an eighth of an inch or a quarter of an inch. So the point is that whatever difference there may be compounds itself, especially with bigger sizes. Definitely you want to swatch. So let me show you my swatch, and it has been washed and blocked and dried. Let me see which is the top and bottom, if I'm got this going correctly. Okay, here's my swatch. Now, you'll notice I did not do a long tail cast on. This is the special Swatch cast on. And the reason that I did this is because it's definitely more representative and it doesn't distort the fabric. So you want your swatch to be like a cookie cutter of the middle of your sweater. So it's an accurate representation of what the pattern will be like. And when we do those garter stitch edges or garter stitch on the bottom, yes, it keeps it from curling, but it's not representative of what the center of your sweater will be. Unless, of course, you have garter stitch in your sweater, and most of us don't. Anyway, so the bottom part I knitted and I measured my gauge, and then the top part, well, let me explain. I knitted the bottom part, and as I was going along, once I got to about here, I measured in several different places when it was unblocked. And I realized, well, that's kind of close, but I'm going to switch to a different needle size just for the sake of testing, because I want it to be as accurate as I can. So then I did the second needle size and washed it and blocked it and then measured. So you will ask, well, what needle size is this? Well, I'm not going to tell you because it's not relevant to you. I mean, I will tell you. I swatched with a US 5 and a 4. However, your mileage will vary. Everyone's tension individually is different. You may get the same results with a 3 or a 6. I mean, I don't know. It depends on how you knit and whether you're a tight knitter or not, or a loose knitter. So my results are not necessarily relevant to you. Does that make sense? I hope so. Drop your questions down below if it doesn't. But as I said, going back and forth is a little bit different than knitting in the round. Now, I still have my yarn attached to this and I haven't blocked it yet, but this is my speed swatch in the round because I wanted to see what the colors looked like. I think it goes this way. And see how I have all this funkiness in the back? That's because I carried big long floats across the back as I was knitting. So I was knitting round and round, but I just didn't complete the whole cylinder. Do you see what I mean? I would just knit across and then bring that float over and do it again. So I have an accurate representation of what my knitting in the round is like when I measure here and here and here in various different places. So my knitting in the round, I will wash and block this to ensure that it is correct, but it is a slight difference. The other advantage to knitting in the round is that you can see how your colors work out. I may change the order of my colors, I may not. Anyway, more about all of this. I'll cut to my measurements and show you what I've done.
Okay, let's take a look. So I've knitted a pretty large swatch actually, and I have two different needle sizes here, which is why I did a purl row between so I could differentiate between what was what. So I started out with my first needle, and the reason I've knitted such a large swatch is because I want to be able to measure a full 4 inches in more than one place so that I'm getting an accurate measurement rather than just with, the little window that comes on your knit check tool, that has the needle gauge plus the little window for your stitches per inch. I mean, those are okay, but I would rather have a more accurate measurement, as I mentioned in my swatching video, that measures several places over all 4 inches. So what I want to do here is line this up so that the edge, not the end of the ruler, but where the number one where the actual line starts, is at the beginning of a stitch. And then I'm going to count all the way across until I end up at the edge of a full stitch on a complete inch. So I don't want to have, measuring the edge of a full stitch at 3.5 and then trying to do the math for that. So the other thing that's more accurate if you wanted to do this is use the centimeter side, because that's what many patterns, 4 inches is 10 centimeters. But you have a little bit more accurate measurement over the whole course of the numbers. So what I noticed is that my gauge is slightly different between this section of my swatch and the other needle size. Now, what I also noticed is that my tension is slightly different between going back and forth to knitting in the round. So this swatch hasn't been blocked yet. I'm about to go and do that. But just preliminarily, my swatch is a little tighter knitting in the round because I've done the speed swatcher where I've just carried giant floats behind. And then knitting in the round is a little bit tighter because I'm not doing the purling on the way back and bringing that yarn forward. So we've talked about that in the past. The other reason I did a swatch in the round is I wanted to see how my color sequence would look. I'm not sure I care for this and this next to each other. I might move this lighter turquoise up to the top by the purple and then have like 2 purples, the boysenberry, and then the lighter purples, and then this. But I wouldn't have known that necessarily had I not done my swatch. So in this particular case, I'm happy to have done that to be able to see the color sequence and what I may or may not want to change.
Again, swatching is super important. Now, if you don't want to take the time, I mean, this was like a couple hours. It wasn't that big of a deal. I was watching a movie with my kids. But the thing is, if you don't want to swatch, that's fine. That's a valid choice. However, that means you're a process knitter. You don't necessarily care if the finished project fits you or not. And you're okay knitting a sweater first, enjoying the process of that, and then finding a recipient for it later, or potentially frogging it if you can find it, or donating it. And that is a valid choice. For me, I want this sweater to be for me and I want to be able to wear it. So I am taking the time to swatch, and that is why. So you do you, certainly. But it's a valuable use of your time to figure out what works best and what will give you gauge and what will result in a satisfactory result. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed your swatching and taken some notes. Put your pictures of your swatch on your Ravelry project page and then absolutely link me to that. I'd love to see your swatches and your yarn choices. Update that project page on Ravelry. Post in the Ravelry group or tag me on Instagram. As I mentioned, I'll put the links to all those things down below in the video description. Looking forward to Cast On Day, Friday the 17th. See you then.